When 24-year-old Valerie Reyes was last seen by her family, everything seemed normal. But what would happen in the next few days would be unimaginably devastating. Her silence sparked concern, which quickly turned to worry. She didn't answer any calls, didn't go to work, and her social media accounts were silent. As the days passed, the questions grew. Where was she? What had happened to her? But there was something even more frightening about this disappearance. Because just before she vanished, Valerie had said these words to her mother.
"Mom, I'm so scared. I feel like someone is going to kill me."
Were Valerie's words just a figment of her imagination? Or had she truly predicted her impending fate? In this story, we will see how what appeared to be an ordinary disappearance actually turned into a horrific reality. Valerie Reyes' disappearance would be etched into the memory of not only her family, but the entire country, leaving a deep and lasting impact. New Rochelle, New York. Valerie Reyes was born here on April 9, 1994. To her family, she was no ordinary child. She grew up surrounded by love and became, in her family's words, a unique soul, a humble, artistic, and feisty young woman. She graduated from New Rochelle High School in 2012. She loved books and enjoyed learning. Her friends described her as calm, reliable, and a nature lover. After high school, she worked for a while as a sales consultant at Barnes & Noble. To her coworkers, Valerie was kind and quiet. But Valerie wasn't just someone who sold books. She was also interested in art as a hobby, and among her dreams for the future was to become a tattoo artist and open a shop. Walking in nature was more than just an ordinary activity for her. Sometimes she created escape points for herself to breathe, sometimes to find peace. But the burdens of life sometimes weighed heavily on her. She struggled with anxiety and depression from time to time. Her mother knew her daughter was trying to cope with these difficulties. The tattoos on Valerie's body also had meaning. They reflected both her artistic spirit and her inner feelings. The problems Valerie had been experiencing in recent days indicated that her sense of security had been shaken. Just one day before she disappeared, she called her mother and said,
"Mom, I feel very uneasy and paranoid. I'm very scared. It's as if someone is going to kill me."
These words carried a meaning beyond ordinary concern. At that moment, her mother was also worried, but no one knew that this sentence was actually a harbinger of disaster. From the outside, Valerie's life seemed calm, but deep inside, a growing fear had begun to take hold of her, and before long, this fear would become reality. January 2019. Life in New Rochelle was proceeding as usual for Valerie's circle, but the same could not be said for Valerie. There were small peculiarities in her behavior that, upon closer inspection, would make sense. Valerie spent the evening of Sunday, January 27th, at home with her family. Her mother, Norma, sensed that her daughter was restless, a little quiet and a little distracted, but she didn't think much of it that day. After all, anxiety and nervousness were normal for someone so young. That evening, Valerie left her family and returned home. The next morning, January 28th, things changed. Valerie did not go to her shift at Barnes & Noble, where she worked every day. Her coworkers could not reach her. Her phone went unanswered. This was not normal behavior for Valerie. She was a responsible person. She didn't go to work the next day, January 29th, either. Her social media was silent. Her friends called, her mother tried repeatedly, but there was no word from Valerie. Her sudden, unusual disappearance now caused concern among those around her. Norma began to recall the words her daughter had said to her days earlier.
"Mom, I'm so scared. I feel like someone is going to kill me."
At the time, these words may have seemed like ordinary anxiety, but now, with her disappearance, they took on a whole new meaning. Was her daughter really in danger? On January 30th, Valerie was still missing. Her family officially reported her missing. The police checked her home. It was tidy, and everything appeared normal. There were no obvious signs of injury, but a forensic examination detected small amounts of blood in various places. A small blood stain on Valerie's pillow, 2 small stains on the bathroom floor, and 1 more in the toilet. However, these were very small amounts and not particularly informative. The police began gathering information from the neighborhood. Phone signals and bank records were examined. But no one knew that Valerie was actually approaching an irreversible end during those days. February 5, 2019. Road maintenance workers were doing their routine work in Greenwich, Connecticut. At that moment, a red suitcase on the side of the road caught their attention. At first glance, it looked ordinary. People sometimes left unused items on the side of the road. But this suitcase was different and stood out. It was large, heavy, and seemed to have been left in a hurry. When one of the workers approached, curious about its contents, he noticed a pungent odor. The zipper was slightly open, indicating that the smell was coming from inside the suitcase and that it contained something unusual. Suspicions led to the police being called. When the suitcase was opened, the scene inside shocked everyone. Inside was the lifeless body of a young woman. She had been squeezed into the suitcase on her back. Her hands and feet were tied. Her mouth was covered with layers of tape. Her body had been forced into a small space. This image was not only a sign of murder, but also of great helplessness. Her identity was quickly determined. The body found inside the suitcase belonged to 24-year-old Valerie Reyes, who had been missing for days. The hopeful news her family had been waiting for ended inside a red suitcase, just like their daughter's life. Her mother, Norma, had been desperately waiting by the phone for good news since her daughter went missing. But the ringing phone brought the heaviest words of her life. The news she had hoped for was a sentence no mother would ever want to hear. Valerie had been found, but she was dead. The autopsy report revealed the cause of death: homicidal asphyxia. In other words, she had been strangled to death. The tape over her mouth completely prevented her from breathing. Her bound hands and feet left Valerie with no chance of escape. The struggle marks on her body showed that she had fought back before her death. Don't you think the helplessness Valerie experienced in her final moments is terrifying? This situation leads one to ask, what kind of person would choose such a cruel method? The public was shocked when they heard the news. Greenwich was known as a safe and quiet area. No one could believe that such an incident could happen here. Now there was no longer a missing young woman, but a brutal murder. And this murder left both her family and the country with a profound question: who could have chosen such a horrific method? Before continuing with the video, if you like this video and subscribe to the channel, you can motivate me to keep making videos like this. Now, let's continue. The discovery of Valerie's body inside a red suitcase was a situation the Greenwich police had never encountered before. The seriousness of the incident was quickly understood. Solving such a murder would not be easy, so the FBI was also brought in to assist with the investigation. The initial examination was conducted at the scene. The police thoroughly searched the area where the suitcase was found. Footprints, tire tracks, personal belongings in the vicinity. Every detail was examined. The position of the suitcase gave the impression that it had been thrown out of a vehicle in a hurry. It was stuck in the mud, as if it had been left on the side of the road. But the biggest clue was inside the suitcase. Her hands and feet were tied. Her mouth was covered with layers of tape. The body seemed to have been hastily stuffed inside. This scene suggested not an organized plan, but the traces of a panicked attacker. The police immediately focused on the people around Valerie. Her family, friends, and ex-boyfriends were questioned one by one. Her family said she was trustworthy, had no enemies, and that her disappearance was anything but normal. Her friends also said that Valerie had been anxious in recent days, but did not explain who was frightening her. According to assessments, in crimes of this nature, the perpetrator usually comes from the victim's immediate circle. Therefore, the focus narrowed. Who Valerie last spoke to, messaged, and contacted on social media before her disappearance was investigated in detail. The first person of interest was Valerie's recently ex-boyfriend. because depending on how he reacted to the breakup, he could have had a strong motive to harm Valerie. However, he was quickly removed from the list of suspects and played an important role in the search for Valerie. And finally, that first critical clue that changed the course of the investigation was found. It was discovered that Valerie's bank cards were still being used after her disappearance. Over several days, a total of $5,350 had been withdrawn from various ATMs. The ATM cameras managed to capture the person using the card. When the security camera footage inside and around the bank was examined, a man wearing a black sweater, pants, and black Adidas sneakers with white soles was seen pulling his hood up to hide his face. The license plate number and model of the vehicle used by this person to withdraw the money were identified from these images. When the police traced this license plate number, they found that the Honda vehicle was registered to a car rental company in an area called Flushing in Queens, New York City. This vehicle had been rented between January 28th and 29th, which coincided with the time Valerie went missing. And the name of the person who rented this vehicle was familiar: Valerie's ex-boyfriend, Javier Enrique da Silva Rojas. The picture was starting to become clear. The prime suspect in Valerie's disappearance was her ex-boyfriend, Javier. Valerie's name was now all over the television and newspapers. While the whole country was trying to find out what had happened to her, another name was emerging from the files on the detectives' desks: Javier Rojas. So, who was this man? Javier was born on January 3, 1995 in Venezuela. While studying there, he decided to move to the U.S. to start a better life due to the economic crisis in his country. He came to America on a 90-day visa waiver, which tourists or business visitors can use. But over time, he overstayed his visa and remained in the country. His name even appeared in official records among those subject to deportation. Despite this, he continued to live in New York. He worked odd jobs and shared travel photos on social media. He constantly told those around him that he wanted to stay in America. From the outside, it seemed like an ordinary immigrant story, but in reality, Javier was a stubborn man who couldn't accept defeat. In early 2018, Valerie and Javier met through a dating site and dated for 3 months before Valerie ended the relationship in April 2018. At first, Javier seemed kind, attentive, and fun. Valerie may have been attracted to these qualities. But things changed over time. Javier's overly jealous, persistent, and controlling side emerged. Valerie told her friends she wanted to distance herself from him. When she decided to break up with him, she felt relieved, because she had seen Javier gradually turn into a more controlling and disturbing person. When the relationship ended, Valerie drew a clear line. She didn't change her phone number, but she blocked Javier's number to prevent him from reaching her. She stayed away from him on social media. She wanted to leave this relationship behind and chart a new path for herself. But for Javier, this was not easy. In his eyes, Valerie was not just an ex-girlfriend. She had become an obsession he couldn't accept losing. During the police investigation, a portrait of Valerie drawn by Javier was found in her home. There were also posts on Javier's social media accounts that still referred to Valerie, hidden behind the name Val. These traces showed that Javier's mind was not yet convinced that the relationship was over. Valerie had actually expressed this fear in the words she said to her mother before she disappeared. Perhaps Javier was behind this sentence, at the center of her fears. The bank cards that continued to be used after Valerie's disappearance were one of the most critical clues in the case. ATM cameras clearly showed the vehicle used by the person using the card. That person was Javier Enrique da Silva Rojas. Now the police had a suspect. As a result, the police collaborated with the FBI and arrested Javier on February 12, 2019. During questioning, Javier initially denied the charges. He made statements that defied logic. He said he found Valerie's wallet on the street while hanging out in bars in Manhattan. He said there was a piece of paper inside the wallet with the card's PIN code written on it, which allowed him to use the card to withdraw money. He said he hadn't gone to Valerie's place, hadn't seen her for over a year, and wasn't responsible for her death. However, as the interrogation progressed, his statements began to change. He eventually had to confess to the murder, but he tried to downplay it by saying it was an accident. He claimed that during their argument, she hit her head and that he didn't intend to kill her. However, the autopsy report contradicted Javier's statement. Valerie's hands and feet were bound, and her mouth was covered with layers of tape. The cause of death clearly indicated she had been strangled. Javier's account did not match the facts. The route Javier took in his car that night also supported the evidence. Furthermore, police records show that when Javier's phone records were examined at the time he left, his phone had been in airplane mode for a period that night. This small detail alone was indicative of a deliberate attempt to cover his tracks. That night, Javier rented a car in Queens and put his phone in airplane mode. He had met Valerie in New Rochelle. It is not known exactly what happened between them, but despite there being no signs of a violent struggle in the house, Javier later claimed in his statement to the police that Valerie fell during an argument. This suggested that Javier had removed any clues from the scene before leaving the house. But the truth was clear. Valerie had been attacked in her home, suffocated, and killed. After the murder, Javier panicked and took action. He put Valerie's body in a red suitcase. The zipper of the suitcase had been forced shut as the body was squeezed inside. Her hands and feet were still bound. Her mouth was taped shut. He loaded the suitcase into the car he had rented and set off. He then began driving towards Connecticut. In the early hours of the morning, in Greenwich, he rolled the suitcase down the side of the Glenville Road and left immediately. Perhaps he thought no one would find it, or perhaps he was just panicking. But days later, thanks to road workers, this horrific truth came to light. Javier's big mistake was using Valerie's bank cards, thinking he wouldn't be noticed after the murder. Over several days, he withdrew a total of $5,350 from different ATMs. He also sold Valerie's iPad. These traces led directly to the police finding him. After Javier's arrest, the case was transferred to federal court. This was because the charge was not a simple murder. It was kidnapping, resulting in death. Javier's fate was now in the hands of justice. In other words, it was one of the most serious federal crimes in the United States. The penalty for this crime could range from life imprisonment to the death penalty. During the hearings that began in 2019, Javier's lawyers argued that he had no intention of killing Valerie, but the evidence presented to the court was very clear. Valerie's hands and feet were bound. Her mouth was covered with layers of tape. Her lifeless body was placed in a suitcase and taken to Connecticut. Her bank cards were used. None of this evidence pointed to the murder being an accident. It was all a conscious, planned, and intentional act. On February 4th, 2020, Javier finally pleaded guilty. By accepting the charge of death resulting from kidnapping, the case entered a new phase. Instead of a trial that would drag on with jury deliberations, the court would now focus on his sentence. This confession was a bitter consolation for Valerie's family. At least it was clear who the perpetrator was and that he did not deny his crime. The sentence was announced on September 23, 2021. Javier Enrique da Silva Rojas was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. It was also decided that he would be placed on probation for 2 years after serving his sentence. When the verdict was announced, silence reigned in the courtroom. Valerie's family knew that although what they had lost would never return, justice had been served. Valerie's story was not limited to the horrific truth that emerged from a red suitcase. Her name became a symbol of how devastating violence can be when ignored. At 24, Valerie led an ordinary life. She worked at a bookstore, had an interest in art, and found peace in nature walks. But in one night, an obsessive relationship and the shadow of violence took away all her dreams. Today, Valerie's name is not only found in the lines of a murder case file, but also serves as a painful reminder of what can happen when violence is ignored or downplayed. Her tragedy prompts many people to ask the same question. When someone close to us voices their fears, How much do we really listen? And how seriously do we take them? What do you think about this case? Do you believe a 30-year sentence means justice for Valerie, or is no punishment sufficient for such a loss? If you enjoyed the video, please like it and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video.